Good afternoon. Welcome to the second session of this afternoon. The theme of the session will be moral leadership. And in this session, we will have two German-speaking speakers. The first speaker is Professor Ingeborg Gabriel from the University of Vienna. The topic of this presentation will be building bridges in time and space, early modernity and its implications for understanding present times. Now I give the floor to Professor Gabriel.
A big pleasure and honor indeed to be here in Macau for the first time. And I have to say, I actually came as somebody who wants to learn a bit about the culture. So I'm a bit apprehensive of giving a talk. When I talked to Professor Rotlin and I said, well, listen, I'm not a medieval specialist of any kind, nor a historian. We came to a theme, however, which interests me already a long time, that is the roots of modernity. And there is a very central book by a Dominican, Marie-Dominique Chenu, who also influenced Vatican II greatly. And Marie-Dominique Chenu published a book in 1966. Sorry, I'm not the best with. Okay, there we go. Published a book in 1966 on la théologie au XIIe siècle, and it was translated in 1968, Nature, Man and Society in the 12th Century. This has nothing to do yet with the PowerPoint, but I have to say, I also made my PowerPoints before, and I had the feeling I'm speaking to students here at the university, not to my colleagues. So I changed a bit the introduction, and I wanted to tell you about this book of Marie-Dominique Chenu, and his main hypothesis was at that time that actually the roots and origins of modernity are in the 12th and early 13th century. And I was very much impressed by this book. It's also the background for his studies on Thomas Aquinas. Chenu has not been received all that much in his historical studies, but now historical studies also show that this is actually really the time where the European main transformations took place. This, for a certain reason, is of importance because these transformations came out of the Christian religion and of a certain factors of the time, and not as historical science saw till a decade ago, that it was mainly out of wars and conflicts in the 14th and 15th century. There is a very good article I can, if somebody is interested, I can send him the papers by Anna Grimala Buse, who is a Stanford historian, and she shows the newest research in this area on the roots of European civilization in this time. The background of my talk is also that we have in our present world a tension between a universal globalization, and more culturalization in many areas. And we have to bring these two forces into a balance. And that's why I'm so happy also, thank you to the organizers, that we can speak here about these questions of cultures and of the roots of cultures. And I think in all these areas, we have to learn much more from each other, because we need both, particularly in a globalized world. Cultures are physical spaces formed by people in history, as a result of the human spirit. That means they incorporate values which are transmitted and through various traditions in a certain area. Cultures are always embedded and have at the same time a universal orientation, which may be called the 2 points of an X-clip in human anthropology. As I said, this notion of modern European culture in the 12th, 13th century was developed by Marie-Dominique Chenu. And I want to speak here about 3 major transformations that took place at that time. That is the discovery and application of empirical science and technology. That means natural law and the cosmic order. Then civic city culture, which was also based on laws. And the notion of law here becomes very important. Civic institutions and early capitalism, and the universal humanism and the exploration of the world. So these were, we were just talking about the heading, these were in a way the social innovations of the time, which were very substantial. They were based on 3 sources. Between European culture was always very plural in that it, I'm walking too much, that it always had 3 sources. On the one hand, Judeo-Christian biblical sources, on the second, philosophical sources, and then legal sources from the Roman background. So Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome always played together in the formation. And as Chenu explains, it was at that time that all these 3 sources were being reinterpreted. One has to say before, and here I'm coming also to the speech before on the Mongols, that since the 5th century about until the 14th century, all of Europe was always under the danger of invasions from the east. So we had tribes invading Europe, destroying the culture, and the only actually institution that continued to transmit the antique heritage was the Roman Catholic Church. There is at the moment a very good book by Jürgen Habermas, whose name you may have heard here. He wrote the 2, with his 95 years, he wrote a 2-volume history, also a history of philosophy. The first volume has already been translated into English. It appeared last year. And the second volume, I suppose, will come. And as far as I could see from the homepage, there is also a Chinese version being prepared. So, and he is the only one who also gives 300 pages to this time of transformation from the 5th to the 16th century, and also includes this 12th, 13th century in his accounts, which is actually quite a achievement, because in Western philosophy, as you may know, the period between the 5th and the 16th, 17th century is normally evaded as a kind of the Middle Ages, which were not really philosophical, but based on a faith culture. So he is one who tries to bridge this gap. The important innovation, one of the important innovations, was a strong notion of the law. And this notion of the law is very interesting because it has actually 2 sides to it. It is the laws of the physical world, the laws of nature in science and technology, and it is the laws of the social world, natural law, which played a big role also in Catholic thinking with its diverse levels. The main idea being that we can grasp the cosmic order through our mind in a process of participation, and then should transfer this knowledge which we have gained into human laws. So this is a notion which then becomes governing actually the European thinking up to human rights concepts. So we have in this phase also a civic culture, beginnings of a civic culture based on law. I want to speak now about these three transformations. The first is the cosmic order and the laws of nature. Each culture has a certain relationship with the natural world and with the social world. And here we have a new transformation of how the empirical world was seen. That two sources of this were, on the one hand, the understanding that the cosmic order, the laws of nature, are created by God. That means it's not only the revelation of the history, but it's also the revelation in nature, which becomes of importance. The second, that was done then on the basis of Aristotelian philosophy, which takes a different view of the world from Platonic philosophy, which continues to play a big role also in the writings, let's say, of Thomas Aquinas. But it always starts out with the observation of empirical realities. So, for instance, if you ask what is a law, you speak about the empirical reality, what you can see as a law in the society. And on this base, then there is a big movement of discovery in the region of science, Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, etc., to observe the natural reality and to describe it according to the laws. What are the laws of nature? And this movement, if we come back to Marco Polo, is of course of importance also then for him, because a lot of inventions are being made in his name. All of this is seen as a very God-pleasing activity. That's why there is, I put in this picture from a manuscript, God with the circle from the 12th century. So God is being shown as being a scientist himself, you know, and then the humans can take in of becoming scientists in this other direction. New technologies are also being developed. Like, for instance, this is St. Stephen's Cathedral. I had to put that in from Austria. But you have the development of the vaults, for instance, that make it possible to have higher structures and to have bigger windows being possible to in architecture. Third picture, nature in the background of paintings. This is Giotto, the Flight of Egypt. So more and more of the details from the real world now also replace the golden background in architecture. We could now go on for a whole century. This will become more and more. In Giotto, it's still fairly a few things, but in later in Perugino, etc., it's becoming much more. The second transformation is a transformation in civic city culture, where the first city councils are being founded. I still have to see, I'm not a historian myself, but I would be still interested in these first developments towards a certain democracy after after antiquity, because we have in Vienna, for instance, a city council since the 13th century, since Vienna became a city, and in many, of course, northern Italian cities, this has been an important development on which fairly few literature exists. Always also in a certain conflict with the nobility, of course, but as a first movement towards equality, and also towards equality before the law. And there is also public deliberation and the creation of other public institutions. It is interestingly enough Max Weber who writes that the basis for all these developments was the Eucharist, the Mass in which people from all social standings could meet in one room, and that this made possible also cooperations between different groups in the society, which he sees as the basis of this civil development. There was a book by Robert Putnam in the 1993, Making Democracy Work, where he says that the civic culture in northern Italy is still one of the main sources of influence that can explain the differences between the north and the south of Italy. There were big discussions on that, but it was a very interesting study which showed that these developments in the north, these social innovations, if you want, were of particular importance. Also, of course, I don't go into that now, the establishment of universities. At the same time, there was also what we can call early capitalism, because a growth in wealth, but also a certain polarization. And that will come also in the next speech, because St. Francis of Assisi was the one who, in his appearance, etc., criticized this pauperization and had a strong social impact, not only spiritual impact, but the two things always go together. Because he criticized, he was a trader's son, and as you know, he gave up all his wealth and became a poverello, as they say, to criticize also this pauperization which took place in cities direction. A third transformation, actually I was then thinking when I looked over it again, was really a Christian humanism, which more and more saw the human being, the imago Dei, man created in God's image, as collaborator, and gave it a completely new, one could say, dignity. This is a beautiful picture from the Cathedral of Chartres. There are others in Portals. You can find that in many cathedrals, where man is, so to speak, it's the creation of man coming out of God. It's not only the creation, but also the recreation, the redemption. And I think it's a very strong image to show this self-assurance of man in the 12th century, which is growing, which also then calls for completely new concepts of ethics in the field of, which also follow Aristotle largely. And I always said to the students, the biggest ethical innovations in this era were really done also by Thomas Aquinas, etc. And he put, I think, 20 volumes of his Summa Theologica are on ethics, just to reflect this new situation of man. Marie-Dominique Chanu also wrote a small book on human conscience, because that also goes hand in hand with a new self-assuredness of man and a new idea that man has to act righteously and good in the view of these new challenges. And of course, it becomes the age of exploration. On the basis of these new scientific developments, on the basis of this new civic culture in Italy, which is also the culture of Marco Polo, and on the basis of the self-assuredness of humans in the reinterpretation of the Bible, the theology, and the new sources of Aristotelian philosophy, man sees himself, or is very curious, and so he also goes to other continents and starts to explore the world. It is interesting now to ask the questions what the implications of this age are. In a way, we are still in this age. Many of the developments which took their roots there have continued. In a certain way, of course, they have also gone overboard. And this would be an interesting discussion to see what the long-term effects are: deliberation, scientific inquiry, human self-assuredness, the notion of human dignity, etc. And which transformations they are now taking. The acting person is innovator, and the ethical questions have become very important in our times, because if these technological developments are not being balanced with ethical responsibility, they become rather dangerous. There is also, from a theological point of view, the drama of atheist humanism, as Henri de Lubac called it. What does the fact mean that all these developments have continued under an immanent worldview, which describes, for instance, Charles Taylor in his A Secular Age in detail. What does that mean for the further developments? And of course, there is still a question of the interconnectedness and interdependence of cultures, which become so much more important today. And here I want to finish with a nice citation from Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist, from 1961 in a report to UNESCO. The only thing which can be fatal to a group of humans, because it will not allow them to develop their full nature, is cultural isolation and no communication with other cultures which can inspire them. Thank you for your attention.